Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear listeners. I hope you're all well wherever you are. I've received some lovely comments from listeners all over the globe, all the way from Mauritius to Canada, and it's just been brilliant, your engagement. Thank you so much for joining me in this journey. And I received a lot of lovely comments as well about my recent video where I'm in conversation with my son about the importance of ethics-based Islam, and I will include a link to the video at the end of this one. So if you haven't listened to that one, please do. I wanted to be in conversation with my son, who's a member of Generation Z. He's in university at the moment, and primarily we talked about shifting from a rules-based understanding of Islam to an ethics-based understanding of Islam and how powerful that is. So your comments were amazing, and there was one particular comment which was about how do we embed the understanding of the Quran in our lives, in our children's lives. How can we interact with the Quran in a way that we feel grounded in it? And that comment got me thinking, actually, and I reflected a little bit on how I have raised my children and how I've talked to them about Islam, but also how I have taught young teenagers. So in my capacity as a teacher, how have I talked to them about Islam and the Quran? So this video is around a set of reflections following on from your comments, and I've titled it Encouraging Criticality and Growing Together with Our Children. And through this very short video, I am going to bring to your attention a reframing, actually, of how we respond to questions that our children send our way, but also how by responding to those questions we grow together and learn together, because that's pretty much been the gist of my journey as a parent. I want to say too that it's not my role to be giving parenting advice. I'm not an expert in parenting advice, but I am a parent myself who's raised two children living here in the West as a first generation migrant to a new country where I've had to learn a lot about how this new country and this new society functions, how it ticks. I've had to do a lot of my learning through my children, because they had this schooling here. Both my sons now, mashallah, I've got twins, they're both in university now. I've learned a lot from them about how they have, because they have been citizens of this society right from the start. They have had their schooling here, which was very different from my schooling experience. So I've sat with them and I've learned from them about what they pick up in school, what their relationships are like, how they interact with society. So a lot of my learning actually has come from them. And I think that's one of the blessings and privileges we do have living in the West, about it opens up that opportunity for us to learn from our children. But thinking back to, I didn't have a conscious plan about how I was going to educate my children. I knew that role modeling is important. We can give our children as many lectures as we like, but we have to role model behavior. Our children actually learn the most from observation. So it's what they observe from parents, from other family members. That's why it's often said that it takes a village to raise a child, because the child is learning from the village. They imbibe and soak up our behavior. So lectures often don't work and they fall on deaf ears. So really, what is that opportunity that we can utilize to talk about religion and what religion means for us and how religion inspires us and how it inspires our decisions and our choices that we make in daily lives? I mean, that's what embedding learning is about, that it should be foremost in our minds when we're making decisions on a day-to-day basis, when we're interacting with other people, when we're making decisions at work. So that comment about embedding really got me thinking. So I'm just going to share some of my reflections, as I said, as a parent and a teacher. And the key takeaway for me, and that I want to share with you today, is that we must actually encourage criticality. We must encourage our children to ask questions, whether they are questions about general matters in life. I've had questions like, especially when my sons were in their teens, why should we obey your rules? To which I've said, well, because I pay your bills. So we do have general questions like that, and often quite funny ones. But then you also have serious questions like, well, everybody around me has a girlfriend and most people have girlfriends and people look at you weirdly if you're not in a relationship, and why are Muslims not allowed this? So here is a question. It's a tough question. It's not an easy question. I'm sure most parents living in the West or in the East will be put in a position by their children where they have to answer those questions. The problem that we have, that we carry in terms of cultural baggage, that I carry as a Pakistani woman as cultural baggage, is that I grew up in a society and a schooling system that went out of its way to shut down questioning. And parents can sometimes act like threatening actors, and they can be threatening and bullying. Our ulama can be threatening and bullying in shutting down questions. So once our ulama have given a simple, this is haram, why don't you understand it? And if you question and you say, but why is this haram? Why are you saying this is haram? And they don't want to give you the explanation, they might just turn that question around and say, well, you are of very little faith. If you had stronger iman, you would not be asking that question in the first place. So our traditional circles have created this idea that not asking questions is the sign of having a strong faith. So having a dogmatic understanding, blind following, unquestioning attitude means that you have strong faith. Well, the reality is the exact opposite. The more you question, the more you doubt, the more you're interested in seeking knowledge. And so questioning is actually somebody's engagement with Islam. Somebody questions Islam and questions faith and even the fundamentals of faith because they're interested in knowing more, because they want to be an informed Muslim. But unfortunately, in my schooling, I remember, because I was always very curious, I used to read a lot of fiction. And I would sometimes, in my English and Urdu lessons, I would just cook up stories and I would write really lovely stories that I had created myself. And my teachers would just fail me, just give me a fail mark and say, this is not good enough. Because the idea was to regurgitate a story, a short story that your teacher had taught you to regurgitate. So you could regurgitate a story, but you could not write your own. And if you ask too many questions of your teacher will say, you're very rude. You are a very rude student. You keep questioning me and challenging me. And the teacher would actually sometimes shout at you or yell at you or embarrass you in front of your class. And so questioning becomes a very traumatic experience. It brings out this idea of shame, that it's shameful to ask questions. And as adults, we don't ask questions because if society is saying to us that our iman is not strong enough, then by asking questions, we feel we're exposing ourselves. And we're saying, well, I'm asking a question. Does that mean I'm somebody of poor faith? That I'm doubting this? Does that mean that my iman is not strong enough? And so we carry this sense of shame, embarrassment, and sometimes in extreme cases trauma, because we've been bullied by an authoritarian parent or a religious authority that has shut questions down and embarrassed us or made us feel really bad about ourselves. This is kind of the cultural baggage that many of us carry. So what happens is, and this used to happen with me at the start as well, that your children will ask you a very tough question and you suddenly go into a state of panic. You feel threatened and you think, oh my God, am I not doing a good enough job as a parent? Why is my child even doubting the very basics here? But I've said this, I've told them this. And then I had to work on myself to change my thinking, living in a different society. And I realized that to be able to answer my children, I had to increase my knowledge of Islam. So I had to do work myself and improve myself. So that was my learning, especially when my children were about to finish primary school and start high school. And many parents will start seeing those shifts, particularly at that point. The other thing is that in the Western education system, and this is something I absolutely admire about them, they teach children at a very young age to say why. So you have children will start nursery or school, and they would be like in the first year of primary school, and they're like tiny, and they will come home and they will say, why? Why must I sleep at 7:30? Why must I have a shower at 7? All my friends are playing outside. Why can't I play with them? Why can't I do this? Why can't I do that? Why do we have so many rules? And so quite early on, you have to learn as a parent to respond to the why, because here's a child who's being taught not to just take facts and knowledge just at face value, but to ask questions, to verify, to find out more, to have a rationale behind something. So even rules should have rationales. They should not be arbitrary. Now, this is a profound shift, especially for first generation immigrants like myself, who came from a schooling system where you were just simply not allowed to ask why, and asking why could lead to punishment, especially social punishment. And you come here, and from the age of 4-year-old, 3-year-olds will start asking you why. Okay, so it's a major shift, and parents, especially first generation immigrants or even second generation immigrants, we need to learn to shift our own ways of thinking in response to this fundamental change. Now, I'm not saying that parents do not have some level of authority over their children. They do, but there is a difference between authoritarian parenting, That is where your child is afraid of you and you scold them for asking questions or for questioning your authority, compared to what we call authoritative parenting. And authoritative parenting is actually an effective form of parenting. I found the difference between those two when I was reading this excellent book. There are lots of books on this, but the one that I would really recommend is this one, by Dr. Gabor. He's absolutely brilliant, and this book is called Hold On to Your Kids. I will put a link to it in the description as well. And it also specifically talks about peer pressure, why parents need to matter more than peers, because we know peer pressure becomes very significant, especially for young teenagers who look more and more towards their friends as a source of guidance rather than towards their parents. And that's the point where we need to hold on to our children very gently so they continue to take values from home rather than taking values from social media or influencers or their peers who are immature children like them, but who become very important to them at that time because teenagers want to belong. So I'm not talking about here about any permissive forms of parenting. I personally believe that authoritative forms of parenting are very effective. And in some of those aspects, I think the Pakistani culture does get things right. But I think more often than not, what we see are authoritarian forms of parenting, which then shut down questions from children. So what happens when a child asks a question? When we come home after a long day at work, if I've spent 11 hours at work, I've come home, I'm stuck in the kitchen, I'm trying to get dinner ready, I'm utterly exhausted, and I have zombie brain. And I'm sure many parents here will be able to empathize with having zombie brain after a long work shift. And your young children are throwing a barrage of questions your way. It is actually quite hard because sometimes you snap at them and sometimes you're like, I'm fed up of your questions, I don't want to talk to you now, etc. But if we give ourselves just a moment's pause and realize that a questioning child, at the moment they ask a question, is an engaged child. Now, I can find other slots during the week. So I might say Saturday afternoon at 2 o'clock, I'm going to sit and have a discussion about a particular matter in the Quran with my children for about an hour. Do they want to do that on Saturday afternoon? Maybe not. It's my timetable. Their timetable might be completely different. Maybe they want to go out with their friends on a Saturday afternoon, or maybe they want to play video games. They're not going to be as receptive. And children, I've found, are never receptive to long lectures about things. But when they are receptive, very receptive, is when they're asking a question. So the first shift that I made was understanding that a questioning child at the point of asking a question is an engaged child. And that is precisely the opportunity where we can share learning with them, whether that's general learning, our experience in life, which we can relate to them, or if it is a moral or ethical matter, then we can bring religious knowledge and religious inspiration into that. So we need to treat a questioning child with respect, because a questioning child is an engaged child, is a curious child, and is an intelligent child who wants to find out more. And that is our opportunity to give them that information. Now, because the West, especially for parents raising children in the West, because the schooling system has taught them that criticality, those opportunities come more often. And I say, Alhamdulillah for that we have been very blessed then to be part of education systems where criticality is core to everything in primary school, in high school, in university. Your critical thinking skills are what become honed as you get older. Knowing how to ask questions, what questions to ask, knowing how to find evidence, how to evaluate evidence, and even learning how to disagree with somebody in a collegiate and respectful fashion. We've seen often, we talk about this, that in Pakistan now the religious discourse is so polarized and there is so much sectarian hatred, and there is kind of this awfully tense atmosphere. It's because people don't know how to disagree with each other. And one of the great things about having a culture of criticality is that you can learn to disagree with each other without falling out with each other or hating the other person. So the fact that the schooling system here is giving our children that powerful ability to become critical thinkers, we need to be actually very, very grateful for that. And I'm grateful to Allah that I had that opportunity here. So, as I said, a question is the perfect opportunity to engage, and the more challenging a question, the more the opportunity to engage. So, I have had all kinds of questions from my sons, from my nephews and nieces, from my students, and they've been along the lines of boyfriend girlfriend culture, heterosexuality, how the Quran talks about that, homosexuality, drinking, gambling, pornography, transgenderism, atheism, and even questions about apostasy. Why can't Muslims renounce their religion if they don't believe in the religion? Those questions have come my way. One of the questions that really stands out for me was from a young girl in her mid-teens who looked very disturbed and very pained when she asked this question, and she said, I don't know how to relate to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We've always been told such wonderful things about him, but I have recently read that when he was in his early 50s he married a 9-year-old. How could he do that? How's that even possible? So this is an incredibly difficult question, difficult for the child to ask, because they're exercising a lot of courage in asking that question, because they know that they might get very harsh responses from Muslims. Imagine if this question was asked in a conservative Muslim circle. I think that child would walk away with a lot of trauma because of how people would respond to them. But here is a very difficult question, which opens up the opportunity for us to talk about things like our reliance on Hadith literature, problems with Hadith literature. For my listeners who think I'm a rejecter of Hadith, I'm not. I have a critical approach to Hadith. But that's what we can develop, is help the child develop a critical approach to Hadith, and then link back to the Quran and talk about how the Quran talks about marriage, etc. So very challenging questions are actually the best opportunities to have a conversation with our children. The other thing that happens is that when children ask you tough questions, you realize you don't know the answer. So, on many occasions I've said, I don't know. I will have to go and find out. This is well beyond my knowledge. On other occasions, I have said, I don't know. You need to give me a couple of weeks because this is a complicated question. So I'm going to do some research and some thinking and then come back to you. On yet another occasions, I have said, I have found an answer, but personally, I don't find that answer satisfactory. So I'm going to give you the answer that I've now found, but I don't find it satisfactory. And actually, if you don't find it satisfactory, just say it. That's fine. And then you can create opportunity to work with the child to find answers to those questions. Because sometimes children, because they're so well informed now, mashallah, I mean, the generations now in their early 20s, in the late teens, even in the early teens, are such well-informed children. You can have fantastic conversations with them. So we can say to them, let's find out together. You do some digging, I will do some digging, and then we'll come together and we will try to find an answer, and we'll see if that answer is satisfactory. And here is the opportunity then to open up the Quran and say, okay, let's read verse so-and-so in Surah An-Nisa, or let's read the divorce verses in Surah Al-Baqarah, or the inheritance verses, or let's talk about how in this particular instance the Quran deals with a dispute that is raised by a woman who questions Prophet Muhammad's decision. So here is an opportunity, and also there are opportunities to look for other sources as well to reinforce learning. We don't have to make learning boring. I have on occasion sat down and talked about linking it to things like documentaries, where if somebody's done some research on the human DNA and what the human DNA tells about us about the origin of human beings, and then compare that with the origin story in the Quran about Adam alayhi salam and his creation, and Eve's creation, so we can compare the two. Sometimes I've picked up biblical stories and compared them to the Quran stories about prophets and said, this is how these two stories differ. This is what we can establish. This is what we can't establish. So we don't just have to look at the Quran. We can use that as an opportunity to look more broadly as well and try to get an understanding. And one of the things that when we treat our children with respect, when they ask questions and engage with them, then one of the things that happens organically and automatically is that our own knowledge base increases. I found that my knowledge base increased phenomenally because I needed to find out more and learn more so I could give satisfactory explanations to my sons and to my students. So it forced me to learn. And when we deliberately create space for criticality and difficult questions in our households, we actually create we have a very amazing relationship with our children, where our children are encouraged to ask questions, to come to us for advice, for inspiration, to help clarify their confusions, to communicate with us. And as a parent, we're learning from them, but we're also learning together. And as parents, we also become more humble because we realize that there is so much we don't know, and then we have to go and find out. And I think that humbleness is a great trait that you develop as a parent. So rather than always talking at your children or talking down to your children like a sage on a stage, I'm the wise one and you're stupid, we actually treat them with respect. So we sit with them and we listen to them and we listen to their concerns and questions. And then we say, okay, I'm going to find out more. And humbleness requires us to say, actually, I don't have the answer. I don't have the answer yet. I'm going to talk to a friend who's more learned, or a scholar who's more learned, or I'm going to do some more reading, and then I'm going to come back to you with an answer. So in criticality, having that culture of criticality at home means that we also become quite humble in our seeking of knowledge. And I do believe that the Quran wants us to be like that, to be always pondering, to not know all the answers. We will never know all the answers, and that's fine. But we can work with our children to find the answers together and just develop that really respectful relationship. One other thing I want to say in terms of a questioning child and an engaged child is that is also our opportunity to relate to them the rationale or the wisdom or the hikmah behind different religious rules. Because once a child is in conversation with you and they want to find out more, that is when you can say to them, and this is why. And I think it's very important to satisfy the child's curiosity. The why that they've asked, we have to satisfy the why. I'll give you an example. Children might ask things like, why are Muslims not allowed to drink alcohol? Why is alcohol haram? Well, here's an opportunity for us to open up the verse in the Quran where Allah forbids alcohol and forbids gambling. But then the Quran always gives us the rationale for rulings as well. You know, Allah does not, and I do not mean this in any disrespectful way, Allah does not give us arbitrary rules. He's not arbitrary in his decision making. He explains his decision making throughout the Quran. So every time a rule is given in the Quran, a yes, no, or a prohibition, an explanation is also given. And so the same verses will say, because it increases enmity and hatred between people. So here is the reason why alcohol and gambling are forbidden. Then we can talk to our children about what we mean by increasing enmity and hatred amongst people. When it comes to marriage and keeping our children away from any immoralities, keeping them away from things like boyfriend and girlfriend culture, and especially sexual promiscuity, we can give them the reasoning from the Quran, where the Quran says that chaste men are for chaste women, and explain why it says that, but also make the learning relatable to them, that we want to treat other human beings with dignity and respect. We don't want to cause heartbreak every 6 months by changing a boyfriend or a girlfriend, because people are not clothes, like trendy clothes that you discard after one season and then you buy another set of clothes and you clear out your wardrobe. This is not how people are. People have feelings, and people deserve emotional and legal commitment from another person who wants to develop a deep bond with them. We shouldn't just discard people just because we feel like it. And so casual sexual relationships actually trivialize human emotion, and they harm other people, and they cause a lot of heartbreak. And this is the kind of hikmah that the Quran is capturing for us. And that's why it says that marriage is about sakina, it's about tranquility. You find peace there. You can't find peace in relationships outside marriage. There would always be insecurities and problems. So we can then relate things back to their situations. And I found often that when I was having conversations with my students as well, a lot of their questions emerged from situations at school. Somebody said so and so to me, they were Islamophobic, or somebody was racist. Or a Muslim boy came up to me and said, why are you not wearing the hijab? And those are the questions that children are concerned with, and we can use those questions as an opportunity then to talk about the moral and ethical underpinnings of Islam, and why Islam is so powerful in helping guide us in these really challenging and difficult situations. So that's kind of my set of reflections. I want to say as well very briefly that the Quran is not the only source of knowledge. Sometimes I've seen Muslims make this case that the Quran encompasses everything. No, it doesn't. The Quran is a book of guidance. It is a book of spirituality. And yes, it is a book of law, but we know that that law and how we understand that law needs to be reformed and needs to be changed, because our understanding of that law is outdated. We know that. But the Quran does not give us answers to everything. The Quran is not a book of history. It is not a book of science. It is not a book of philosophy. We need to learn history from books of history, and philosophy from books of philosophy, and social science from books of social science. So ideally, we need to be encouraging our children to read very widely, because criticality grows. The more you read, the more your critical ability, your critical thinking ability improves. And so as a parent, then one of the things that I always used to do was insist, when I say insist, join my children in reading. When they were little, I would read to them. When they became independent readers, they read, and I would never say no to buying a book. And I still have that rule that if my children want to buy a book, I will say yes. I mean, provide affordability obviously can come in sometimes, but if I can afford it, I will say yes. And so the culture to develop then is around broader reading, not just reading the Quran. The Quran is a book of moral guidance. In the end, it's a book of hidayah, and that hidayah is important for us, but it's not going to be able to answer all of our questions, because there is a huge amount of knowledge that human beings have created. And I personally believe that all knowledge comes from God. We have to look at the ethical implications of that knowledge. Some knowledge could be harmful, some knowledge could be beneficial. We have to make that decision based on our moral and ethical considerations. But all knowledge is through human creativity, and human creativity is God's gift. So all knowledge is God's knowledge. We can choose to interact with it the way we like. We can choose to exploit it. We can choose to use that knowledge to exploit other people. That choice is ours. But we shouldn't shun our children from wider reading. And the more wider reading they do, the more questioning there will be. And the more questions we ask, the more opportunity it gives us to sit with them and engage with them. So these are just some of my reflections. And I'm just going to conclude by saying that when we have a questioning child, we should say Alhamdulillah, and we should take it as an opportunity to engage with our children in really meaningful ways. That's how I trained myself to think. And when we have a questioning child, we learn and grow together. A questioning child is a great blessing. They force us to become better people, more humble people, and I would like to think better Muslims as well, and certainly better parents, as we learn to engage with them in those meaningful ways. I hope that you find some of these reflections helpful. Thank you very much once again for all of your engagement on my channel. I have hundreds of comments from all of you for each video, and those comments are really profound. You're all taking a lot of time to engage and send kind of lengthy comments to me, which I really appreciate, because I think that speaks highly of your generosity, because everybody's busy, for you to take out time to do that. And as you're sending those comments to me, it's also helping me understand what's important and valuable for you. So it's informing my thinking, and you will see that I then try to incorporate your comments and your reflections in my videos as I work on them. So thank you very much once again for your engagement, and do keep listening, and please do share the content here with your family and friends as well, if you think that would be of benefit to them. Jazakallah. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.